live. Well, welcome. For those of you who are visiting us online, welcome. My name is John Mitchell. I'm Executive Director and CEO here of Arden Wood, and we're delighted you're joining us on the internet. What you just saw, or you didn't see if you were not here, is we just showed a beautiful new video that we did regarding our rest and study and overnight stay program. So, pretty neat. It's a spectacular day here in San Francisco. It's 65 degrees, cobalt blue skies, the plum and cherry trees are out. We survived last weekend's Super Bowl, so we're glad that that went well. Mavericks surfing contest is going on down the road in Half Moon Bay, and then, as you know, the Pro-Am is underway at Pebble Beach. We'd love you to visit us this winter, if you can, or anytime this year. We'd be happy to give you a tour. And for those that are in the room today, we have lunch available after this meeting, and a tour of Arden Wood at 1:30. We're pleased to have with us here today someone who's been a friend of Arden Wood for many years and very familiar with our organization. Paul, as you know, last spoke to us in October of 2011. Paul Collins' aunt, Aunt Gloria, is a resident here, and it's fun. He calls her Auntie Glow, and you have never seen a prettier smile when Gloria smiles when Paul greets her. Paul's dad was Clem Collins, a beloved Christian Science teacher and publisher's agent at the Mother Church. His mother, Ellen, a practitioner and lecturer, and his grandfather, Floyd Collins Shank, CSB, who was our Northern California Committee on Publication, as well as a beloved teacher and practitioner. And their association and executive committee meets right here at Arden Wood. As you know, we don't promote or endorse investment products or services, but we are interested in hearing more about how to pray about and intelligently navigate the uncharted waters of domestic and global financial markets that we're confronted with in every news cycle. And more importantly, we want to get a better understanding of supply. Paul Collins has a lifetime of experience in making sense of financial markets. He'll share with us what he's seeing and how he is metaphysically addressing these seemingly uncertain times. Paul is president of the American Trust Investment Advisors and portfolio manager for the Allegiance Fund, a top-ranked mutual fund. He started his investment career over 35 years ago, providing security analysis for the Treasurer's Office of the Mother Church in Boston. He was later hired by State Street Bank as a trust officer and portfolio manager, and eventually was appointed to their investment policy committee. In 1990, he left to start American Trust and Allegiance Fund, the only mutual fund that screens out tobacco, alcohol, gaming, and pharmaceuticals. Paul lives in Wellesley, Massachusetts with his wife, Mary, but he grew up just down the road in Los Altos, so he's from the Bay Area. He's active in his church. He's taught Sunday school, ushers, served on the board, served as first reader. He's been on the flower committee, so he knows how to withstand harsh scrutiny. Oh boy. He also serves on numerous charitable and corporate boards. Paul will address us today for about 15 minutes on the investment climate, and about 7 to 10 minutes for Q&A, and then he'll give a metaphysical talk for about 30 minutes, and then followed by a hymn. His talk is Leaning on the Infinite for Our Supply. Please join me now in welcoming Paul Collins.
Okay. Well, John thinks I'm here. Can everyone hear me all right? John thinks I'm here to address these very timely issues of the investment markets and the economy and thinking more clearly about supply. But actually, it's 10 degrees in New England and it's 65 degrees here. So this is why I'm here. Well, before we begin, let me just say that Arden Wood is doing a wonderful job of seeing the needs of its community and addressing those needs, responding to those needs, not just in events such as today, but in fulfilling its healing mission. So Arden Wood gives us a lot to be grateful for, and this is a good moment to do that. Thank you, John. And one other thing I have to interject. I was here in November visiting my lovely Aunt Gloria for Thanksgiving. My wife and I were here. And John said, you know, I think in the middle of February it'd be a good time for you to come out here and talk about the investment climate and some inspirational ideas. And I thought, this is great. You know, 3 months ago, the economy at that time was great and it was improving and the stock market was close to new highs. And I thought, you know, addressing a group when the markets are up is always a really fun thing to do. Because I know very few tomatoes are thrown at that time. But here we are together, and the markets have their worst start to any year in 80 years. So I think actually that's a great time to be getting together and talking, though I didn't know it at the time. This is propitious. This is an important time to better understand the markets, better understand what's going on with the global economy, and to think more clearly from a spiritual basis. So, John, I don't know how you knew this 3 months ago, but there's always a job for you in the investment field, all right? Well done. So as John mentioned, this morning we're going to talk a little bit about the investment climate and then an inspirational talk about issues of supply and then some specific ideas on that issue for branch churches. Immediately at the end of this investment portion, I'll be taking questions, so please feel free to jump in with questions at that time, or interrupt me in the middle of my talk if you'd like. I'd be glad if I'm unclear about any point, please don't hesitate to say so. Also, I understand that on those watching this live streaming on the internet, that they'll have an opportunity to ask questions as well. I've been told there's a sidebar on your screen as you're watching it on the internet, and so please feel free to use that to submit questions. I will tell you though that I have Amelia here that's screening the questions. So Amelia, if you get a question like, honey, when are you going to take out the garbage? Please screen that out. All right, thank you. So this first slide, let's move to that, is the mandatory disclosures. Essentially, it says that past performance is no guarantee of future results. And of course, you knew that. So you've been properly, everything has been properly disclosed. So let's start talking about the current investment climate. Where are we? Well, in 2015, the markets were essentially flat. They didn't go up, they didn't go down. But in 2016, we're, 6 weeks into the year, the US stock market is down about 9%. And if you go to the next slide, very good, you're way ahead of me, Amelia. You'll see that world markets reflect the same sort of fears and pessimism. So you'll see that in China, stock market's down 24%, Europe down quite a bit as well, a little worse than the US, et cetera. So it's been an extraordinary beginning, extraordinary amount of difficulty. And why is that? So you've all heard the litany of reasons. The most common reason given is that China has slowed down. Its growth has slowed. That slowing growth has resulted in a ripple effect across the country, particularly emerging markets. So that slowdown around the world has caused a decrease in demand for commodities. So we've seen a fall in the price of oil, for example. As oil prices have fallen, the 20% of our economy here in the United States that is involved in the oil industry has seen great troubles. In addition, the economy in Europe has been growing very slowly, and the US economy in the last quarter only grew 0.7%. So the great fear in the end is that the slow growth in the US and Europe and the slowing growth in China will ultimately push the world into a recession. So that's where we are. I'm not sure how helpful that's been, but I'm going to leave it there as the summary. Telling you where the markets are, of course, is the easy part. I think the much more interesting question and the more difficult one is telling you where things are going. That's obviously where it gets difficult. Now, if I've learned anything in my 35 years in the investment field that John referred to, is that you should never prognosticate. Actually, there's one thing I've learned much more convincingly, and that is humility. Being in the investment business for 35 years, if you're honest with yourself, you are a humble person. So please believe me, I've learned that in spades. But for prognosticating, well, let me start. I've painted a rather dire picture, but let me try to put that in perspective by showing you the bigger picture. Let's start with jobs. The ultimate indicator of how well an economy is doing is the jobs picture. In 2015, 17 million jobs were created in the United States. That is extraordinary. I'm sorry, it was 2.6 million is the actual number. That is the largest number of jobs created, second largest in 17 years. So we had extraordinary job creation in the United States. That's important because with that level of job creation, a confidence comes not only from the consumer, but it shows confidence of the employers. The problem with that indicator is it's referred to as a lagging indicator. In other words, it shows what happened in the past. So let's look at a leading indicator. The best known leading indicator is initial jobless claims. So by a leading indicator, we mean something that shares with us what is likely to happen. Okay, so initial jobless claims in the United States last year were the lowest in 42 years. So that means layoffs that took place in 2015 were the lowest in over a generation. That's extraordinary. And that points to the confidence, again, of the employer. And this is the type of statistic you would never see if the economy were starting to slow down in the United States. Rising unemployment is one of the first signs of a struggling economy, and we don't see that. In fact, unemployment has fallen to 4.9%. That's from 10% at the worst part of the recession a few years ago. So we've made tremendous progress there. And wages in December were up 2.5%, which is a very good increase year over year. So now let's turn to auto sales, because auto sales give you a sense of how the consumer is doing. The consumer is very important to our economy. It makes up 2/3 of the economy. So if the consumer is doing well, the economy is doing well. So auto sales are considered another leading indicator. And we had 17 million cars sold in the United States last year. So that is the largest number of cars sold in our history. Again, extraordinary sign that the consumer is showing confidence. Employers are showing confidence. So let's go to the next slide. The average American's credit score has risen to 695. That's the highest level in 10 years. So not only is the consumer feeling confident, but their credit is improving, and debt for consumers is down about 20% from the last recession. So it's a sign that the consumer is much stronger than they have been in many years. And lastly, energy costs are falling, as we mentioned. Declining gas prices at the pump are like an enormous tax cut for all Americans. While low gas prices hurts about 20% of our economy that's related to the oil industry, it's really a tremendous help to 80% of our economy. So that's another encouraging sign. Finally, economic growth, you can leave it there, that's fine. Economic growth is steady. For those worried about a boom and bust cycle, the economy in the United States actually has grown at about little less than 3% for the last 10 years. That's pretty steady and doesn't suggest anything like we saw in 2000, where we had a boom and bust cycle. So here's my last leading indicator. My wife and I were recently at a quaint, charming old country inn. This is actually a couple of weeks ago. And I was looking at the books on the shelves, many books in this beautiful old library. And I noticed that some were very well used and others had gathered quite a lot of dust. But clearly the one that hadn't been touched for years and had gathered much dust was the one entitled The Coming Economic Boom and How You Can Invest to Take Advantage of It. So some of you might guess when that was published. It was published in 1999, just 3 months before the market crashed. So the fact is, back in 1999, there were hundreds of such books being published. We don't see them anymore. It's much more likely you'll see a book that in your bookstore that's entitled Why the Economy Will Never Recover. So that's another good sign. So in conclusion, though there are many challenges facing our economy, the fundamentals in the U.S. are strong and should provide opportunities for long-term investors. So don't be too concerned about the headlines you see in the nightly news. The bigger picture gives you the fundamental view. All right, so let's talk about asset allocation. This is the last slide, and regarding our economic climate before we move on. After this slide, again, I'll be glad to answer any questions. So this chart shows you the performance of the stock market since 1950. It is a tool used by nonprofits, churches, college endowments, foundations, individual investors in determining the proper balance between stocks and bonds. As you know, stocks provide growth potential for a portfolio, and bonds provide stability. They're designed for income as well. So the proper balance between stocks and bonds is very important and will vary based on your particular situation and needs. So how do we determine the right amount? Well, let me give you an example. The most commonly used balance is 60% stocks and 40% bonds. And I'll show you, that's this line right here. So as you can see, over the past 66 years that this chart encompasses, the average portfolio with 60% stocks and 40% bonds has grown at a little over 9%. So that's a reasonable expectation. Maybe to be conservative, you want to use, if you're budgeting, maybe you want to use 7.5%, 8%, somewhere in there. But that's the average for growth of this type of portfolio. You'll also notice that it doesn't grow 9% every year. It shows on this chart that actually in one year, the very worst year of the 66 years, such a portfolio grew at, let's see, it fell about 16%, I believe it was. Yeah, 16%. And in the very best year, it rose about 33%. So there is volatility in even this type of conservative portfolio, and therefore one should not invest in such a portfolio if one is a short-term investor. You could have most anything happen over a short period. As you know, that over short periods is a time when emotions tend to take over the economy. We're seeing a great deal of emotion, as we just talked about, in the market today. Probably a lot of not irrational exuberance that took place in 2000, but irrational pessimism, I would call it. So you don't want to invest over short periods, but investing over longer periods, this type of risk and volatility tends to go away, tends to decline. So for that reason, the rule of thumb is that you should not put anything into the stock market that you cannot commit for at least 3 years, and hopefully much longer. So be an investor, not a trader. A trader goes in and out of the market and with the whims of the market, and it's never a long-term formula for success. If you do that, risk and volatility become, unfortunately, a constant companion. That is why the famous investor Warren Buffett said, "My favorite holding period is forever." Now, I'd be glad to answer any questions. Yes. Oh, here's a microphone. We need to turn on the microphone just a second. I want to make sure we hear you. Yeah, we'll get it working. Yep.
Testing.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
All right.
What is the source of the information providing 4.5% unemployment? That seems impossible.
Yes, it does.
Uh-huh.
Because we hear about a lot of people unemployed, don't we? So that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics from the United States government. So they provide that statistic. But you're right. It's a little misleading right now because what that statistic does not include and never has is something called the participation rate. So the participation rate in the US right now is 62.5%. That reflects the percentage of people who normally would be looking for jobs and are still actively looking. So if the participation rate is 62%, it means that 38% of Americans have been looking for jobs and have given up. So that's not a very good statistic and shows that there's still a lot of work to be done. So excellent question. Yes, in the back. Let me get you a microphone. All right, thank you.
Is this going through? Okay. With the economy, the direction it's going, and your expertise, you say 60% should be in stocks. What kind of stocks do you favor in the coming year? Large caps, small caps?
Sure.
Tech, what sectors?
Sure, good question. So the internet could hear that question. Very good. All right. So 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds and cash might not be appropriate for you. That's something that's used, as I say, largely across the country. But the right balance for you depends, again, on your particular financial situation. But what types of stocks might be appropriate, might be attractive? So when I'm quoting statistics from the chart that you were just looking at, those are based on the performance of the S&P 500, the Standard & Poor's 500, the most broad measure of performance in the US. Those include value stocks, which are more conservative, like utilities, and growth stocks that are more aggressive, like Apple stock and other technology stocks. So it is best to put together a portfolio that is good for the long term. And so a broadly based equity portfolio is probably most appropriate. Many investment advisors will tell you right now that growth stocks are very popular, most promising, I guess I should say. Last year, the Standard & Poor's 500 index was up around 1%. That's misleading. If you took the average stock in the Standard & Poor's 500, it was actually down a little over 2%. So why is the S&P up 1%? Well, it's what's called cap-weighted, capitalization weighted. So it's unduly skewed or influenced by the larger names in the S&P 500. So 4 names were dominant in the performance of the Standard & Poor's index last year. They were Amazon, you all have heard of that, Netflix, Google, and Netflix. Yeah, Netflix and Google. Let's see. Well, Apple was in there. Anyway, there were a few stocks that did very well. In fact, they were up an average of somewhere like 15%. So they did an extraordinary job. But I don't recommend investing in those more aggressive names because they're very expensive. We measure expense by what's called the price to earnings ratio. And those stocks have a price to earnings ratio generally almost 100. A normal price to earnings ratio is about 16. So for that reason, it might be smart to be careful about these growth stocks. So far this year, those same stocks are down close to 20%. So that level of volatility you do not need in your portfolio, even though it might show long-term promise. This is a long-winded way of saying, don't try to choose the best sector or the best asset class, but try to choose a broadly diversified portfolio. For many of us, exchange-traded funds are a nice answer. Exchange-traded funds are like a mutual fund, but essentially invest broadly in various indices to give you strong diversification. So I hope that helps. In the back, we have someone. John, thank you.
I guess I have a couple questions. One is, I wanted to find out a little bit more about bonds because bonds used to be so fabulous and now they're not as fabulous. And I also wanted to find out just the idea of getting older and having that ratio, that percentage change a little bit. From
Very good. Good question.
Those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
So let me answer the last part first. It is good to be more conservative as you move towards retirement. Retired people tend to put more in bonds, as your question suggests. It's a little difficult right now because, as you know, bond yields are so paltry. On a 10-year U.S. Treasury, you get less than 2% today. It's extraordinary. So it's difficult. Nevertheless, it's still important to keep a large percentage in bonds, not for income, because obviously that is not what you obtain from bonds right now, but for stability. Your portfolio needs to have a stabilizing influence, and bonds can give you that as long as you stay with high quality bonds. Many people are tempted right now to buy lower quality bonds to give them the higher yield or the higher income, but that is to be resisted. On your question about bonds in general, it's important to note that bonds have been in a 30-year bull market. In other words, they've done very well for the last 30 years as interest rates have declined. You might recall in 1982, you could get 18% for a 10-year US Treasury note, 18%. And since then, interest rates have been declining. As I say now, that same Treasury note has a yield of less than 2%. So it's been an extraordinary period, but I think we are on in an inflection point where we'll start seeing bond yields rise. The Federal Reserve Board has made it clear they're going to start raising interest rates. In fact, they started a few months ago. The expectation is they will continue to do so. In that environment, bonds do very poorly. The value of your bonds will decline as interest rates rise. So it's a good time to be careful with your bonds, stay with quality, stay relatively short. You shouldn't be buying, on average, bonds of more than 2 or 3 years in duration. And remember, bond portfolios are a very good place to be careful about. Bond portfolios have average duration, in other words, time before the average bond matures, of about 6 years. What this means is that if interest rates go up just 1%, the value of that bond fund will decline 6%. So it's easy to see an environment where interest rates will rise at least 3% from these historically low levels. And in that environment, such a bond fund will decline 18%. Extraordinary for bonds. So it's a good time to be careful. Take a fresh look at your bond funds. Make sure you're in bond funds that have very short durations. Again, 3 years or less, and have a good quality holdings. All right, we have a question right here, and I will shorten up the answers because we are running a little short of time. Yes.
Information. Thank you for all this information. And just wondering what you suggest for young people who are just entering the market now and may not be able to work with an investment advisor right away because they don't have the amount of money.
Yeah, great question. I love that. So for young people, they're in a great position because they have the ability to make time work for them. There's a wonderful rule of compounding that will work. I would suggest that young people open up an account at a Fidelity or Vanguard or Schwab, any of those discount houses, and they can start by investing in these ETFs I talked about, exchange-traded funds, broadly diversified. Young person should be much more aggressive. They shouldn't have 60% in stocks. They should have more like 70 or 80% in stocks because they have this long time horizon. And so, as I said, risk goes away over time. And they should put money into such stock investments as the exchange-traded funds I just mentioned that are stock-oriented, and commit themselves that they're not going to touch that for at least 10 years. That could be a wonderful situation, and we're coming off of some nice levels. So, great question. Anyone? One other. We'll take one more, and then we'll continue on.
I have 2 little questions. One is, what do you think the probability is or possibility of a Greece kind of expropriation of savings or government moving IRAs into their control, anything like that? And the other thing is, buy and hold strategies have been what I grew up on, but in terms of individual stocks, but there's a lot being published about how that's really the way not to invest anymore, that it's buy and
very
trade.
good. Love those questions. So first, the Greek question. What this is referring to is Greece last summer froze savings accounts. They didn't let people take money out of their checking accounts. It was an economic disaster. Fortunately, we're not in the same situation. The capitalization required in Greek banks was almost nil, whereas the capitalization requirements in the US for US banks has never been more stringent. In other words, banks are not allowed to leverage themselves the way they did in the 2008 financial debacle. They've been forced by the US government to hold much higher levels of capital. What this does is make them more resilient should we have a difficult period. And also, it makes sure that funds are there if people need to take money out, which was not the case in Greece. That was their problem. The other question was about the volatility. Yeah. So the U.S. market, the stock market is as volatile as it ever has been. So is there a better strategy to take advantage of this volatility by not buying and holding? Maybe you could buy, let the market go up, sell at a certain time, wait for the market to go down, buy again. Maybe there are opportunities in this volatile market to not just hold on to your assets in your portfolio and let them ride out the ups and downs of the market. So that's a good question. The answer is you will not find one professional investor that has successfully done that in the history of our country. The problem is you have to get two things right. You not only have to sell when the market is indeed high, you have to buy at the right time when it's low. Both those things are very difficult to do. To do them one after the other is highly unlikely and actually adds risk to a portfolio. So the discipline, sometimes that's the hardest thing, the discipline to hold on to stocks during difficult periods and allow rationality to return to the market is sometimes difficult, but it is the right long-term approach and it is the least risk. So thank you for those questions. Did we have any others? Okay, well, we are good. So let me move on to our more substantial portion of today's discussion, leaning on the infinite for our supply. The invitation this year to this year's annual meeting of the Mother Church in Boston that you probably received by email remarks that this meeting is a time to inspire and strengthen each other in fulfilling Mary Baker Eddy's vision for her church as designed to be built on the rock Christ, even the understanding and demonstration of divine truth, life, and love, healing and saving the world from sin and death, thus to reflect in some degree the church universal and triumphant from the manual of the Mother Church. And the invitation emphasizes the phrase, healing and saving the world. That is how our church is designed. That is what it is meant to do. Can something designed to heal and save the world be successful if it is looking inward? Of course not. Our church is designed to be on the forefront of humanity, and our branch churches are designed to lead this holy charge in their communities. Challenges come to our churches not simply to be solved, Challenges come to our churches to be healed. More specifically, they come to our churches because they need healing in our communities and the world. Ask yourself, are any problems that your branch church faces unique to your church? Or are they community problems coming to our churches to be healed? How about smaller attendance at our services? Is that unique to our church? Well, in the 1950s, 70% of Americans attended church. Today, it's around 20%. And the other challenges we face, be it fewer volunteers, an aging edifice, or an apparent lack of funds, they are all world problems that come to our churches to be healed. Across all denominations, not just Christian Science churches, 8,000 churches close every year in the United States. That is 3% of the churches, suggesting that over the next 10 years, 1/4 of all churches in the United States will close. Again, this is all denominations. Our branch churches have the opportunity to lead their communities in healing this suggestion that church is no longer relevant. When we are tempted to believe that the body is ill, we do not accept that suggestion, but vehemently reject it. You are all familiar with the admonition in Science and Health: agree to disagree with approaching symptoms of chronic or acute disease. Whether it is cancer, consumption, or smallpox, meet the incipient stages of disease with as powerful mental opposition as a legislator would employ to defeat the passage of an inhuman law. So why should we approach claims about our branch churches any differently? It is our responsibility to reject these claims with as powerful mental opposition as a legislator would employ to defeat the passage of an inhuman law. Responding to the world's call. I was on a flight recently from Boston to Phoenix. Toward the latter part of the trip, I suddenly felt physically ill. I immediately opened the lesson for that week. A passage from Science and Health stood out to me. Love, redolent with unselfishness, bathes all in beauty and light. I could see that that illness had nothing to do with me or nothing to do with my physical body. By the time I finished the lesson, I had a much greater sense of peace and was able to enjoy the short time left of the flight. As we were about to land, there was an announcement that there was a medical emergency on the plane and that passengers should stay in their seats when we reached the gate until paramedics had taken the passenger. So I thought, this is my cue to take up the work and see the spiritual reality and not the material view of things. Then I realized I had already taken up the work. Just as I had learned that the illness had nothing to do with me, illness had nothing to do with any passenger on the plane. And then I remembered the citation that meant so much to me at the time, but this time I thought of it with a different emphasis. Love, redolent with unselfishness, bathes all in beauty and light. When we got to the gate, as everyone obediently remained in their seats, a man walked up the aisle to the front of the plane, immediately followed by the relieved announcement that the paramedics did not need to board the plane, and the man had walked off on his own accord. I was so grateful. The healing confirmed a number of things for me. First, our physical problems are not personal to us, but simply a human belief that we can choose to accept or not to accept, a belief that comes to us for healing. It might be a world belief that needs to be handled, or it might be a call for individual progress. In any case, it is unreal because it is not true. It is not personal. It is not in the body. So similarly, in our branch churches, if we are struck with the suggestion that we have limited resources or limited supply, we should not think this a problem personal to our church. Our community, in fact, the world, is constantly suffering from the imposition of the belief of limited resources. Just as the belief of a sudden illness had nothing to do with me physically, but simply came to me to be healed, the belief in limited resources has nothing to do with our churches, but simply comes to our churches to be healed, leading us to rouse the dormant understanding from material beliefs, as the definition of church tells us. Whether that material belief that needs to be roused in our community is apathy to spiritual growth, the reality of disease, or limited supply, they all come to our churches to be healed. Answering the call. So we all agree that for our churches, the phone is ringing. And it's the world asking for help. What do we do? Here, it is important to resist the temptation to redecorate. Okay. Pause for laughter. All right, very good. Changing our church's material structure, or selling it or merging, is not answering the call. The right physical structure will be the natural outcome of our focus on elevating the race. That is what we need to be doing. The right steps for your branch church will be based on what calls for healing in your community. Today, we are focusing on better understanding God's infinite supply. To this end, I have put together a list of articles found in the Christian Science Sentinel and Journal, specifically about healing the challenge of supply for our branch churches. Copies are available as you leave. I found these full of fresh and inspiring ideas. What can you do with these articles? Well, one approach might be to ask your branch church members to each choose an article they would like to read and then share what they learned at a church meeting on healing lack. Of course, there are many other things to use these powerful articles for in healing supply. I'm sure you'll have a lot of ideas. The decision to express the infinite. I'm sure that we all agree that sinning is a decision. For example, before one can rob a bank, one has to decide to do so. But what about disease or limitation or lack? Are those decisions? A friend recently sent to me an article they discovered on JSH Online by my grandfather, Floyd C. Shank, that John just mentioned. Some of you might know him because he was a teacher of Christian Science in San Francisco for over 60 years. The article is from the December 12, 1970 Christian Science Sentinel. It is titled, "Our Moral Power to Be Well." And it starts, "From the writings of Mrs. Eddy, one may learn that Christ Jesus, our way shower, taught and demonstrated the way to overcome the temptation to be ill, just as he showed the way to overcome the temptation to relinquish control of the body to sin. Here is a pertinent reference from the Christian Science textbook, Science and Health. The moral man has no fear that he will commit a murder, and he should be as fearless on the question of disease. Is it fair then to extend this fearlessness to the question of lack or limitation? If so, then the temptation to sin is just as much a decision as the temptation to believe we have limited resources. It is a decision. Just as we have a moral imperative to not sin, we have a moral imperative to express the infinite in our relationships, our physical dominion, and our sense of abundance. Can we express the infinite and not express infinite good? There is another wonderful Sentinel article from 1974 entitled Church, Its Infinite Substance. And it's also in the handout you're going to get at the end of the meeting. This article further explains the concept of supply as a decision. Quote, we can draw an analogy between men with financial stringencies and churches with insufficient funds. Individuals with financial worries are greatly helped as they begin to identify themselves rightly as the unlimited spiritual phenomena of mind. This leads to the conclusion that we can never actually suffer from being restricted mortals. All we can ever suffer from is a concession to the material appearance of limitation. If we go along with this appearance unresistingly, we suffer limitation, not because we actually are restricted mortals, but because we concede we are. The currency of gratitude. So, how does one know if they are making progress in their understanding of supply? Should they look at their bank account? Well, of course not. It's like looking to the body to know if there's been a healing. The better measure is looking at our level of gratitude. I love hymn number 250. To me, it suggests that joy and gladness are the ultimate currency that we should be counting when we look at our true treasury. The hymn shows, our gratitude is riches. Complaint is poverty. Our trials bloom in blessings. They test our constancy. Oh, life from joy is minted, an everlasting gold. True gladness is the treasure that grateful hearts will hold. So, is our branch church progressing in its demonstration of abundance? Well, are we ourselves progressing in the joy and gladness that we feel from each church service? Are we progressing in the joy and gladness that we bring to each service? This is the everlasting gold we should be measuring. Of course, the natural dividend of joy and gladness is gratitude, and gratitude gives us this joy and gladness. It's referred to as a virtuous cycle. These are the currencies we need to be counting in our branch churches. To this end, there could be value in a branch church coming together to share gratitude with each other. There is no stronger step toward healing lack in your community and your branch church. Now, you are all familiar with tithing. The term commonly means giving 10% of your income to the church annually. It is interesting that in the glossary, Mrs. Eddy defines tithe with not only the common meaning, 10th part, but also its more inspired definition, gratitude. Thus bringing new meaning to the question, do you tithe? In fact, do you tithe could be an excellent title for a branch church meeting on dealing with supply. I would suggest that if we all tithed, in the highest sense of the word, giving gratitude, there would be no lack of supply in our churches. Economic cycles. Our economic cycles, which are the rise and fall of economies around the world, just a fact of life? Or are they just another world belief that comes to us to be healed and to which we should refuse to concede? In Luke, we learn that Jesus was asked about the kingdom of God by the Pharisees. And when he was demanded of the Pharisees when the kingdom of God should come, he answered them and said, "The kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, Lo here or Lo there. Behold, the kingdom of God is within you." God is not with us sometimes and removed at other times. God is consistently ours. Good is consistently ours. It is part of our being as children of God. True goodness is permanent, untouched by economic cycles. The kingdom of God is within you. It is our sacred privilege to share the blessing with our communities and the world as the imperfect model, be it apathy, fear, or lack, comes to our churches to be healed. Mrs. Eddy writes, "Do you not hear from all mankind of the imperfect model? The world is holding it before your gaze continually. Let unselfishness, goodness, mercy, justice, health, holiness, love, the kingdom of heaven reign within us, and sin, disease, and death will diminish until they finally disappear." Now, let's sing together the hymn we've been working with, number 250. Oh, when we see God's mercy widespread in every place, and know how flows the fountain of his unbounded grace, can we withhold a tribute, forbear a psalm to raise, or leave unsung one blessing in this our hymn of praise? Hymn number 250. When we see God's mercy spread in every place, how close thou found. final benediction from First Church and Miscellany. Rest assured that he in whom dwelleth all life, health, and holiness will supply all your needs according to his riches and glory. Amen. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Paul. So grateful. Paul will be joining us for lunch. There'll be a tour at 1:30. Just on your calendar, the Arden Wood annual meeting is Sunday, May 1st. The title of the talk will be Today Hath Need of Thee. And to find out who the speaker is, you'll just have to tune in a little later. October 1st, the title of that talk is Love, the Biblical Basis for Healing. And again, you'll have to tune into our website to find out who the speaker will be. Glad you came today. Thank you for coming. Look forward to seeing you online again. Bye-bye.